we left off with this idea, and I didn't really get to unravel it very much. And if you haven't been able to be here for all of the series or whatever, forgive me, it's just too much to cover if I go through everything every single time. So we're just going to pick up where we left off, and we should end kind of on a good stopping point tonight. This should be the end of it. But embraces resonance over amplification. These are our eternal markers, and these are the things that would allow us, they should trigger to us like, okay, I'm in a spiritual environment. I'm in a spiritual market. This is something that should give us a clue as to what we're looking for, or even just what you're striving for. If everybody is trying to be the loudest person in the room, all that happens is it just drowns out. It's just abhorrent noise. It just drowns everything out, right? So you can't have any distinction once you start to amplify, because then everyone else is going to amplify, and then the only way that you're going to establish any sort of actual voice is by getting into what it calls their mysterial speech, which is what we would understand as like what the Pope does, right? When he speaks with the authority of God. Well, you don't have that doctrine believed by everyone, but you have that doctrine implemented, right? So I can have a church that doesn't believe that doctrine, but it operates the exact same way. Essentially, whatever this person says is the final authority of whatever truth is, right? It would be just as inappropriate in that context as it would be in the other. There has to be a resounding nature to truth, right? If I'm saying something, then I'm hopefully saying something and it resounds, it resonates in Brother McDivick's heart, and then it resonates in Brother Gill's heart, and then it resonates, and then that resonation that is created, it itself sends off its own sound. You understand what I'm saying? So you're getting the body, instead of an echo chamber, you're getting the body supplying itself, where a church is edifying itself because of the truth that's being given to it. All right, so it says a choir is an example of resonance and a loudspeaker of amplification. The amplified voice expects immediate silence from its audience and obedience to its speech. This is magisterial speech. Ideology is the amplification of the eternal. Beginning and end are known, and life must be lived out accordingly. Ideologists hide the choral nature of history. Now, when I say choral nature of history, I want you to think of a seashell that you'd pick up on the beach. And you'd look at that thing, and it's a spiral pattern, right? The spiral pattern is the additions of growth that occurred with the little mollusk that lives inside that shell. The only way for it to grow is from the opening, and because of that, it's going to add layer upon layer upon layer, resounding to a larger and larger shell. Well, not only does history operate the same, and you have to realize that. I will get up here being able to say being able to be thankful or say the good things of the men that went on before us or were before us is essential to understanding where you are now. No Baptist church in America that exists today is not probably the direct result of a bunch of Methodist preachers from at least the 1600s onwards. You say, what? Those things, even though there's misplaced doctrine or whatever else that could have happened, that opposing voice, you see that? Which is a symphony of very different, even opposed voicing, making each the other possible. That opposing voice also made us possible. It also helped found our country. There were a lot of things that, even though they were not fully realized or understood, the writings of even Charles Spurgeon today live on and resound the truth that he did actually have all the way throughout time, and those things that do resound, those things that do echo throughout eternity, they are by nature eternal because they have escaped the time constraints of that man's life. Okay? This is the biggest problem with not looking for or aiming towards the future and getting, when I say the future, I'm not talking about how does it benefit me in the future. I'm talking about life beyond me, the things that I want to continue when I die. You see what I'm saying? If you're not viewing life like that, then you're going to be very inward focused. And it's the same example that Jesus Christ gives about the light. If the light that be in thee is darkness, how great is that darkness, right? That was the basis upon which the eye of Sauron is constructed in Lord of the Rings. It is an eye that can only see outward. It cannot be internally reflective. It cannot see its own evil. See what I'm saying? All right, now I've gone off on a tangent a little bit, but we're going to get back to this. All right, cannons are formed to silence resonance, right? If I'm shouting you down with a loudspeaker about how I'm right, I'm automatically signaling I don't want to dialogue with you, right? I don't want to dialogue. There's nothing dialogical about a cannon. There's nothing dialogical about a loudspeaker, right? What are things that are what we would understand to be not only the course of, like, me and Keith are sitting down, we're trying to figure something out, we're trying to talk through a problem, right? Whether that problem be working on a car or buying something, whatever it is, we're trying to dialogue and solve an issue. You would compare that to like an orchestra and how an orchestra is constructed. The note that I sound, the note that I make doesn't overlay, it's like a layer of a beautiful melody, right? It doesn't silence the trumpet, the violin aids it. You see what I'm saying? All of those pieces come together. It's the same example you're getting when God is talking about the body. Your members are many, but you're one body, right? So if I'm talking about the church, I'm talking about Joseph Carter, right? But I'm also talking about this assembly, okay? And then I'm talking about the universal church at large. And you can scale that out. There are problems that I have with what the church is doing on the American level. I don't live in the Philippines. I don't know what Christianity is doing over there. I know what it's doing right here, though, right? And so if I'm criticizing what has become American Christianity, I'm criticizing it at an institutional level of what we're doing in this country as a whole under the banner of Christianity. And I would slide off from that Catholics. Catholics don't claim to be Christians, right? There's something different. I'm not trying to say that they say that they're Catholic, right? That's what, and I agree with that term. So I'm saying all of that to say the more global my perspective is, okay? The more global it is, the less nuanced it can be. If I'm trying to solve a worldwide problem, it has to be a panacea of truth for all problems, right? But it's not going to be very high resolution because of that. What did Paul say when he went to the Corinth church? He said, I determined to know nothing among you save Jesus Christ and Him crucified. He was going to make the level of their operation way up here because, all right, we're just going to deal with salvation of all mankind for right now, right? And then as it goes on, he kind of starts chastising that church for not growing, right? He's becoming more and more, and then he deals with very specific issues going on within that church. It's the same idea here. You're going to have these pieces that lay on top of one another, and if you're not paying attention to what's going on, you're not going to see how they integrate. And you're going to see that more in what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the dynamic and static state of something tonight, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. All right, so I'm going to keep going. This is the verse that we started with, that he that is of contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you. I think it's very important if I'm against somebody or we're opposed to one another. And I think that's become, unfortunately, I don't know what's caused this, the preset of all dialogue now is that it's an oppositional dialogue. I cannot say something, especially once you take things to like the level of the internet, I cannot say anything, no matter how mundane, without it being taken as an attack in some way. And I've noticed that more and more and more. It used to be I would say something, and then I would get almost no feedback, and the feedback that I got was almost 100% positive, without question. Now, if I say something, because I might be touching a larger audience than before, I'm noticing more and more how abundantly negative the feedback becomes. I don't know what's caused that to be the preset where we have to be at odds with each other, especially with Christians. I'm going to tell you something. Being above reproach is the greatest weapon you have when you are dialoguing with people. If you do not control that pride side of you, you're going to regret it. Because when I've said this before, the past isn't dead, it's not even the past. There is nothing that I regret more than the things that I know I will have to reap the fruit of later. I love to think about the positive side of things. I love to think about the good things that I've put in the ground that hopefully I get to grow the reward of, right? I also have to be realistic that I've put a lot of negative stuff in the ground. I've allowed my ego to get the best of me. I allowed my pride to get the best of me, right? And now I have to reap the fruit of those things as well. But if I can be above reproach, right, then I don't have to worry about that. Now, that's the sprinkling of charity that's supposed to happen once you've reached full maturity. And it's not, I'll tell you where we've messed up. This is what we've done. We have made me having temper and being able to control myself the finish line. And that's not the finish line. The finish line is I don't have anything that I'm holding against anymore. See what I'm saying? If you keep encountering these same scenarios where you're getting super frustrated and then it's taking all of your physical capacity to withhold yourself, you're not in a good place. You need to find what's triggering that thing. Why are you so upset? I had someone today, I have no idea what happened. He wrote a book on every video I've ever posted about how wrong I was or something vulgar or whatever, right? And I didn't even realize what was going on. Eventually I just texted back and I said, why has this made you so upset? I mean, I'm not trying to be silly. Almost everything I put on the internet is just as vanilla as it gets. I'm not trying to be, is that not accurate? Most of these little videos, it's me saying, we all ought to believe in Jesus, and then there's a piano playing underneath of it, right? But I'm telling you something, there's something that's tapping into with people. And you need to, if you are responding with anger, if you're responding in that way, with that emotional response, you have to take in your mind a little leap and think back on the pattern of history, the pattern of the Bible. Why are Joseph's brothers so angry with him? Why does Cain get rejected of God but then kill Abel? See what I'm saying? There has always been a pattern where the truth, it creates a violent response to someone who's in opposition of it. It goes back to when we talked about what your relationship was. This is a while back. But talking about the market and your relationship to things, I can tell you where you're at, or you can tell yourself where you're at spiritually just by how you're responding to it. Look, a sign of a bad marriage, you got not a bad marriage, but you're in a bad place in your marriage. Maybe that's a better way to say it. A bad place in your marriage. Man, if your spouse, just like people that don't want to go home, you know what I mean? Like they don't think of their spouse fondly. It's a troubling thing for them, right? Like it's just like, ugh, I don't want to have to deal with so-and-so. I don't want to, you see what I'm saying? Man, that's a sign. Something's wrong. I'd address that. All right, let's keep going. Oh, this next thing. For a pattern of them which should hereafter believe on him to everlasting life. I want to lay out that choral nature thing. I want to lay out a way that the moment that I step off the scene, the next generation knows how to keep building the shell. Y'all understand what I'm saying? I'm preparing them to take the next step. The same way that David prepares Solomon to build the temple. If David just dies and says, build the temple, there's no temple. What does David do? He gathers everything that Solomon's going to ever possibly need to build that building. And then he passes away. And by the way, before he steps off the scene, On a political front, he says you're going to need to kill him. You're going to need to make sure that's taken care of, right? Because he's establishing his throne for Solomon. And he knows what threatens the throne. There was a drop-off in generations. When you get that in 1 John, it talks about he's writing to children, and then he's writing to fathers, and then he's writing to young men, and then he's writing to children. It was like a generational conversation he's having within that church. At some point in the near past, there was a fall off of what was supposed to bridge the gap generation to generation. And we lost a couple of generations in this country. And the ones that did get captured, they got captured in a bad way. Most of your churches now, they fluctuate somewhere between 70 to 80% feminine. And they've lost almost all men. Now, that's a bad, bad sign. But when you look at the people that are searching for truth, okay? So I'm looking for meaning, I'm looking for truth, I'm looking for insight, and I'm looking for depth. The men aren't going to the church house anymore. That's gone. They're going to secular philosophers. And they're filled to capacity with audience that are almost 100% men. So it's not that men don't seek meaning or don't want meaning. It's that the church house has not augmented itself in a way where they could even approach a man. Honestly. And the truth that they're giving is very, well, it's industrialized. It's synthesized. It's made acceptable for all people. Well, that's not how life works. You go to a job site, are the conversations at a job site, Parker, acceptable for all audiences? We passed a silo the other day, and there were 3 grown men in orange vests, yellow, the reflective vests, and Chelsea's like, what are they doing? I just look over and I see 3 grown men humping the side of a silo. And you say, what is that? That's blue-collar humor. That's exactly what that is. It's not acceptable to all audiences, but she couldn't believe it. I was just laughing. I was like, yeah. I was like, that's what guys do, you know? I don't want to be guilty. I don't want to be guilty of trying to make something so acceptable that it's no longer genuine. You know? Because look, there is milk that I can drink that will cause me I have a bowl of ice cream. It just hurts my stomach now. I don't know what happened. I turned 30 and got lactose intolerant. There is a version of milk that I could drink that would not upset my stomach. Here's the problem. It just ceases to be milk anymore. It's just white water. That's all it is. You see what I'm saying? I don't want that. I wanted milk, you know? Anyhow. All right, cannot be scripted. This is important. I'm hard on preachers for a reason. It bothers me if I listen to a guy, and I'm telling you, I don't know. I've got to be in the running for one of the people that have listened to more preaching than anybody at my age. I've listened to a lot of preaching at my age. I would honestly underrate it at least 10,000 messages. It's got to be, if it's not more than that, okay? I'm telling you, I can lay out almost 90% of guys' messages after the first verse. After the first point, I could lay out the rest of their message if they're preaching a 3-point outline. I could give you, if you told me the title, I could probably give you at least 90% of their verses if they're going to use more than 10 verses, which most preachers don't now. You say, what is that? Not only is it boring and unoriginal, it's non-eternal. It just isn't. Anything that scripted and formulaic, I'm sorry, you haven't tapped into anything. You didn't tap into God. God didn't speak to you. Look, man, you used your brain to construct a message. I can do it too. That's easy. You want to tap into something real that actually changes something. When we were putting this together, I had read a book and it changed the way that me personally wants to conduct church. I do not want to use finite, earthly, carnal practices when I'm up here, nor interact with you in that way. I don't want to use moralistic framing. I don't want to try to put somebody in a bad light so that my light looks better. I don't want to cognitively ease you into thinking that what I'm saying is right. I don't want to mentally anchor you to a truth and establish you completely in a doctrine that I've already believed, and then go back and show you how this person is obviously wrong because I've already got you anchored down on what you should think. I want to approach this thing openly and honestly. And then when everyone comes to the same conclusion and I didn't have to manipulate it for it to happen, man, haven't we tapped into something real? All right, cannot be scripted. Finite and infinite games are the basis by which we explore the corresponding markets. As we have discussed already, finite realities must be scripted and played out accordingly. Finite realities are theatrical in nature and are devoid of true meaning. What do I mean by that? If I'm playing by a script, it's not real. It might even look real, but it's not real. If I gave you a World War II script and you dressed up like World War II soldiers and we went out here and we filmed a scene and it looked just like you were on the beaches of Normandy, you were never on Normandy, you were never in threat for your life, and just because it looked that way didn't make it real, right? You know who it'd be real to? The guy who was there. The guy who actually went through those horrific events. That's who it'd be real to, but it could never be real to you, and it could never be real to anyone else. What could it be? It could be theatrical. It could be emotional. It could be you crying that Iron Man dies at the end of the Avengers, even though he's not a real person, and he didn't really die. See what I'm saying? That's what most of church is now. It's just playing out a theme. It's just playing out a scene. I rehearse something that I've previously written down and said 35 times, and then I get up in front of you and I act like it's the first time I said it. And then I transition, and when I transition, I act like I don't know exactly where I'm going because that's what makes it look better, right? But it's all scripted out. It's not real. Nothing real happened. And nothing real happened for you either. You were just an audience member. I would like something more interactive with the Holy Spirit of God, wouldn't you? I sure would. All right, let's keep going. All that can be done is mirroring back of meaning into the finite reality by a poorly resolute picture of truth, meaning that the known, infinite, and eternal things are portrayed through the framework of the system /game/market. I'm setting up the same terminology, and it applies across all of these arenas. And the reason it applies across all of these arenas is the same reason why sowing and reaping applies across 1,000 different arenas, right? It's the same reason why sacrificial love applies against 1,000 arenas. All truths have layers of truth that touch multiple different levels of reality. They touch you individually. I'm not saying that to be obtuse. I mean that in the sense of they touch you individually, they touch you at a local familial level, they touch you at a corporate level, right? Like there are things that are true all the way up and down as far as you could scale it to any level and it would still be true. All right. So the only thing that you can do when you're playing with theatrics is it's just like we're talking about. I can try to be as real as possible. The best movies are the ones that are closest to reality, right? Like we actually used Sherman tanks. That was real artillery. You see what I'm saying? They were instead of using plastic guns, they were using real guns. They tried to recreate the formations from when they landed on the beach. It makes it closer. It's just still not real. It's just a mirroring of something that once was real. Okay, think of someone who is treating the game of Monopoly as if it were real, or someone watching a crime show believing that the individuals were not actors, but rather actual heroes. The finite game must have a winner, and therefore the ultimate goal of all finite games is for the game to end. Now, the infinite game is open-ended, has no fixed rules or endpoint. To script the infinite game is to fundamentally alter the essence of its eternal nature and negate its meaning entirely. Now, why is that so important? think in your mind, you're going to tell somebody, you're going to give them a physical location, a physical time, an actual address, and you're going to say, where did you get saved at? What was the name? You've said it a bunch of times. What street did you get saved at?
North Aberdeen.
Do you remember the address?
No.
North Aberdeen and McLaughlin? Okay. If there was a physical address there of 10,001, you could not send anyone there, put them on the same house, painting the same piece of soffit, and they would encounter God there. That's not how it's going to work. I can't do the same thing with you either. I was talking with an atheist the other day, and, they're just nice enough guy. He's just giving me his reasons. You know what I'm saying? You're just having a conversation. And I said, well, of course you're an atheist. And he said, why? And he said, because you haven't encountered anything transcendent. And the moment that you do, then you'll have a choice to make. Right? God's not at Nafy's in the deli aisle. But you know what? I bet you somebody's going to encounter God at Nafy's in the deli aisle. In the moment that happens. God's not in my driveway, but I've encountered God in my driveway. You're trying to think of Him like you're going to have this physical capture. And I'm telling you, the more tightly you try to grip eternity, the more readily that thing is going to fall through your grasp. You are not going to find God that way. There is no fact or statistic that's going to convince you of truth. It's going to have to be something more than that. I read a book by a guy named Jonathan Haidt, also an atheist. He is doing work on top of another guy who was in the 70s, kind of established the two-system part of your mind, right? You have an analytical part, and then you have what I would call your intuition. Those are systems 1, systems 2. He built on top of that idea because he figured out that system 1, which is your intuition, is actually the reason that most people make all of their decisions, right? And then he found out why you would make those decisions based on a bunch of different levels down, okay? But they calls that the elephant and his rider. That's what he calls it. The rider is all of your analytical power. And you think that that's why you make decisions. And it's not. It almost has nothing to do with it. And it's completely influenced by that big giant elephant you're sitting upon. Because what happens is, if the elephant gets ticked off, the rider goes for a ride, doesn't he? Right? I'm saying all this to say, I deliberately want to get past the thing that you think is in control. I don't even care about that. Because that'll change all entirely based on what that elephant's doing. See what I'm saying? I want to get that elephant part of you in contact with God. Because that elephant part of you, when you were a little kid, looked up in the stars of heaven and knew there was a God. You knew it. And it was more real to you then than it might be right now in this pew with all the Bible knowledge you've ever had. I'm telling you something, there is a real, genuine relationship. Listen, I appreciate it. This is not A or B, and we're going to get to that. Look, we'll get to that in the next one. This is not learning the Bible structurally is bad. Let's get emotional with it. That's not what it is. It's learning the Bible structurally serves a purpose. The only problem is that purpose is not the same as the other thing. It complements it. But the other thing is the real thing. The other thing is the thing that says, I need Jesus. I don't know what. You remember when you got saved, how visceral that moment was? Where it was like it was a life or death decision in your heart? You think me showing you 2 more verses on Him actually being God, that's what's going to set you over the edge? It's not. That'll come afterwards. I didn't understand repentance after I got saved. I didn't understand salvation hardly at all when I got saved. And all that did is add to something that was already brewing in there. It's a complement to it. But we think this is the important part. And it's not. It's not. All right. The very essence of the infinite market is to be unbounded and constantly pregnant with change. This uncertainty empowers the players to evolve and create with fluidity. Why is fluidity so important? All right, now if you don't understand definitionally what fluidity is, I'll give you an example of this real quickly. If I asked you, who says I'm a creative person? Kirby already knows this example. Who says I'm a creative person? Raise your hand. I'm creative. I think I'm creative. Okay, I want you to give me 12 examples of when you were exceptionally creative that had nothing to do with any other previous time or thing that could be connected to. It was only you, and you created something. You might get one or two, and by the time you wrote down 12, even though he's got 12 examples of being creative, he's going to feel real unsure about being creative. And if I said, now give me 3 examples of you being mundane and boring, well, you can come up with those instantaneously, couldn't you? So even though the quantity of creativity is actually higher than the quantity of mundaneness, he will feel more mundane and less creative simply because it was easier to come up with the mundane examples. That's fluidity in your mind. That's how it works. I can make you make decisions if you're trying to manipulate someone. You understand what I'm trying to say? You can make people do that. These are like a sales tactic thing that people do to people, right? And the other one's mental anchoring, right? You go to a car, how much is the car? We got it on sale today for $17.99. If you looked up on the internet, they've been marking this thing down. It's like 12 grand, right? But he starts you at that high price so that when he gets you down to 14, you feel like you got a good deal. See what I'm saying? It's mental anchoring. I can do the same thing spiritually. Wherever I can anchor you to first, right? Whoever's first is right first. Then the other guy's got to argue against what the other guy said, right? It's why it's so difficult. If someone becomes encapsulated with a false doctrine, it's impossible. It's not impossible, but it is unbelievably difficult to get them shook of it because they've anchored those thoughts in their mind. The only way you're going to do it is by not playing that dumb game and getting past all of that and tapping into that intuition. Because you got to go to something. When I say the word superordinate, if there's an ordinance of things, there's something that's super, it's above all of them, right? If I've got an order of importance, I've got to have something that's above all of that I can tap into, and that way this can't trump it, right? Even if you said the words out loud like you were trying to make an argument for it, internally, your own conscience would convict you and say, I'm saying these words, but that's still right. See what I'm saying? All right, anyhow, let's keep going. This uncertainty empowers the players to evolve and create with fluidity. Without innovation and adaptation, the infinite market would fade into a series of predetermined events and thus bring finality. Why don't we want it to end? Why is that so important? Because it's eternal. It's not supposed to end, right? I'm not trying to be silly here. Pastor started a church. If it ends 10 years after he dies, it wasn't eternal. It was just a guy started a small business. That's all it was. See what I'm saying? And that's what a lot of churches ended up being. They ended up being institutions anchored upon an individual. When the individual passed, the institution died because that's all it ever was a man-derived institution. It never tapped into anything eternal. Something cannot be eternal in nature and fixed. I know what verses you're thinking of. We're getting to them in the next slide. Eternal life is a river of flowing water, not a picture of a river. One will change with every moment and never fade. The other will fade over time and never change. Static state. All right, I told you that something can't be eternal and fixed. What did you all think of? Any of these verses? I am Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. Well, remember you said that beginning and end are known, and if God is known, and see what I'm saying? I am Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, the first and the last, and He is before all things, and by Him all things consist, with whom is no variables, neither shadow of turning. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. Remember how I told you that God's optionality is not your optionality? You want He's beginning and end? Because He's everything. Of course he's beginning and end. He's everything. You're not everything. You're not all-encompassing. I don't count on Gil for the salvation of mankind, do I? Right? Is Gil eternal in nature, though? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a static state, there's a dynamic state. All right. And we'll go through this a little bit more. Dynamic. Therefore, be steadfast, unmovable, wait, always abounding in the work of the Lord. And then we look at the physical side of this. The dead in Christ shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be what? Okay, so if we're supposed to be like Christ, then we're not supposed to change. But yet it says I'm supposed to be abounding. This is several verses. Basically, you got a ton of verses about how you're supposed to change. Now, I don't have all this written out. I've got the rest of this written out on here. How does the concept of abounding and walking with Christ fit into the narrative of never changing? All right? Now, there's a reason why I wanted to say this, and unfortunately, I do not have this slide, so you will have to deal with me reading it. The more global the attempted capture of an idea, the less specific it can be, meaning that the global concepts are low resolution by definition because they are a panacea of truth. The concept of the dynamic state is specific in nature, must be nuanced, thus a higher, more focused resolution is required for their understanding. Simply stated, truth does not unravel truth, it only adds to its depth. Jesus never changing does not nullify our necessity to. Okay? And I would say it like this. Is anyone going to lose their salvation in here? If you are addicted to alcohol, don't you think it'd be a good idea to stop doing that? Is anything going to change the nature of my relation to my son? Right? He's always going to be my son. You take his blood and my blood, that's my son. Right? Okay. Now, could he murder somebody and then ruin our personal relationship? Yeah. Now, sometimes this is called standing in state. I don't like those terms simply because they don't pair up with Scripture well. Standing in state are used a lot. And sometimes they're used interchangeably for both those definitions. I like dynamic state versus static. There are things that will not change about you. There are things that must change, and that is the part of the game. You are always you in the game that you play, in the market that you're in the marriage that you're in. That doesn't mean that you don't need to change. I can't be... what if I came to you and I said, here's the goal, guys. We're going to get everyone in here over 6'5", and I want you to have a 42-inch vertical. Are we going to make any progress? There's things you can't change, right? But what if I said, here's the goal, guys. We're going to make sure that every person in this church, regardless of anything else, is at least honest. We're going to start with honesty. And then we're going to try to push towards us being just. Do you see where I'm going? There are things that must change. All right. We'll end there. That's enough. I think we've gone over our time. I'll close with that.